Starting the switch. It's so ironic. The switch typically does not have a power switch. Yeah, the switch typically does not have a power switch. So what is going to happen is you are going to go in and you are going to verify that your cabling is all set. And then once you verify the cabling, you're going to go ahead and you're going to provide the lower end Cisco switch that doesn't have an on or an off switch. You're going to go ahead and provide that device with power. Once you provide that device with power, you verified your connections, then the switch is going to go ahead and initiate its startup routines, and you can go ahead and observe the pretty lights that are blinking all over the device, right? Yeah, the LEDs that are there to give you status indications, to give you health information about the particular device and its equipment. Let's hear from a guest expert that we have yet to hear from in this class. I don't believe we've heard from Jeff Hardy. Jeff is a longtime, very successful Cisco network engineer for a Fortune 500 company. Let's hear from Jeff about the LEDs that we have on switches and Cisco devices in general. Jeff, go ahead and take it away for us.
If most switches are tucked away in closets or data centers, when will you have the opportunity to examine the LED indicators? When something's wrong, of course. Luckily, there are programs that will show you the LEDs remotely for a quick glance to see if there are any issues. And that's mostly what they're for, in my opinion. The majority of the time, I log into a switch remotely and either look at the interface status through the CLI or look at recent logs to begin pinpointing issues. The LEDs can be useful if you're familiar with them and can't log in remotely to a switch. So just before I console in, I'll look at the LEDs to see if there are any obvious problems like no green lights where there should be green lights. However, the LED indicators and modes do vary by switch model. In many environments, you will have a few models to contend with, so it's up to you if it's worth memorizing different modes and indicators on each model. You will want to know the specifics for the model indicated in the exam, though. But in the field, probably the best use for the mode button is holding it down while rebooting the switch in order to perform password recovery.
Well, great stuff. Thanks so much, Jeff. Awesome. And I am just about ready to connect to a rack of equipment for demonstrations today. And I'm still just struggling with that. It was all set up moments before class, but then you know how that works. There are issues with it just before the class actually kicks off. So just give me 1 minute here in the background to get our equipment set up that we're going to use for our practice today. All right. It looks like we're there. Great. So here I have just logged in to a Cisco switch. And what I did was we made a console connection to this device, right? And we are observing what's happening here at the console for that particular device. And it looks like all kinds of stuff is happening as this switch is already racked up and cabled with a bunch of other Cisco switches and routers. And all this equipment has just been powered on. So we're seeing all of this stuff initialize here on this particular device. And I've got an interesting quandary here. I noticed that this device is named Switch 1. See that? And we talked about this last time. This is the name of the device, and there is a greater than prompt, And that greater than prompt is indicating that we're in user mode, remember? How we go into privileged mode is by typing enable. That gets us into this privilege mode. But I told you I had a problem here. My problem is that this device must have a configuration. Wait a minute. I want to show you what happens when the device has no configuration whatsoever. Yeah, exactly. JB says in the queue, who changed the name? That's right. I want this to be like a factory default switch. So let's do this. Let's pretend this switch was given to us by a friend and we want to erase the startup configuration. We call the saved configuration, remember, in non-volatile RAM, we call that saved configuration the startup-config. So I want to erase the startup config. The switch says, are you absolutely sure you want to do something like that? So I say, yeah, absolutely. I want to erase that startup config, and I hit enter to confirm that. Now, if I reload, we should be at factory defaults with one important exception. There is something called a VLAN database, and that is not part of that startup configuration. And that VLAN database, we'll get more into VLANs later, but let me just show you this, very interesting. That VLAN database is part of Flash. It's stored in Flash. So I'm going to go erase, or actually delete out of Flash the VLAN.database, VLAN.dat. And it says, dummy, you must be in privilege mode to do that. So I'm going to use the N command, and I'm going to highlight that command, copy it to the clipboard, and paste it in. All right, so delete VLAN.dat out of the Flash. Now, Isaac says, what about erase NVRAM? Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I'd be much more specific, right? I would go ahead and say, look, I want to erase the startup config. And let me tell you, Isaac, remember, for your exam, only certain commands will work. And I know for an absolute fact, erase startup config will work. Okay, so we'll emphasize that command in here. Okay, so we have erased the startup configuration. We have erased any VLAN database that might be on the device. So I think we're ready to go ahead and reload. We say reload. It says, are you sure you want to do this without saving any configuration? And we say yes. And the switch is reloading. Why? It's reloading because we used the reload command. Now, how in the world, wait a minute. I need to do something else here. Boy, everything got all messed up here. Just one moment. One moment as I fix one more thing. Just doing some housekeeping on my Windows setup here. And we're not missing anything because we're just waiting for that switch to reboot, aren't we? Yep, we're just waiting for the switch to reboot. And here we go. And we can watch that process, as you can see. What is going on with all those characters? That is a graphical representation of the operating system being expanded into RAM on the device. Pretty cool. All right, it's going through its power on self-test or post of all of its hardware. And it looks like we're about done with this reload of the switch. And remember what we did? We erased all configuration of the switch. And it drops us off at press return to get started. And then we get a bunch of more output of the interfaces initializing on this device. But remember what it last said to me, press return to get started. So I'll hit return on the keyboard. And look at this. I think we talked about this last class, didn't we? There is no configuration on this device. So it offers to guide us through an initial configuration of this device. This is called the setup script, and just about all of your Cisco devices will have this. It's kind of like a wizard if you think about Microsoft technologies, and it wants to guide you through, in this case, at least an initial configuration of this particular device. Notice it says, would you like to do this? And then we have to respond yes or no. If we hit enter, it just keeps asking us the question because we are not providing one of the two options for an answer. Now, I never use the setup script, I'll be honest with you, but just to show you what it's like, let me in this case say yes. We want to be handheld through this configuration. It then says, would you like to enter basic management setup? I'll go ahead and say yes. It says, all right, what would you like to name your switch? I'll give it the very distinct name of my switch. Okay, what would you like the enable secret password to be? I'll say Cisco. It says, what's the enable password? I'll say San Fran. It says, what's the virtual terminal password? I'll say Cisco. Do you want to configure SNMP? I'll say no by hitting enter and accepting the default command. It shows me all the interfaces. It asks me what interface name are we going to use to connect to the management network. I'll say that we're going to use VLAN 1 to connect to the management network. It asks me if I want to configure IP on the interface. I'll say no. Would we like to do clustering? No. And then it shows me what configuration is going to result from all of those inputs, and then it gives us three options. 0, we can go to the command prompt without saving. We can rerun the script, or we can save this configuration to NVRAM and exit. We're going to do the hysterical thing here because this was just for demonstration. I'm going to hit 0. And we just did all that for nothing. And we are returned to the user mode switch prompt. And we can go ahead and configure this switch from scratch now, can't we? Yep, we'll configure it from scratch. Notice switch greater than sign. The switch greater than sign, remember, indicates we are in user mode. When we type enable, we go to privileged mode. When we type disable, we exit privileged mode and go back into user mode. Okay, so enable, disable. And these are all things that I want you to practice in your hands-on lab work. You know, type enable, make sure you go into privilege mode. Type disable, make sure you go back into user mode. you need to be able to configure a switch in your exam environment, and you need to be able to do it quickly and with confidence, and you need to be able to verify your config so that you know that you got the points. And the only way you're going to be able to do all of that is with consistent, constant practice before your exam, for those of you that are taking an exam. Now, you want to give your switch a name. You want to give your switch a name. So we say enable, okay, and we get into privilege mode. But if you say host name, ? It says, I don't know what you're talking about. Why doesn't it know what we're talking about? Well, because if you go HOS ? You'll see there is no command in privileged mode that will allow you to name your switch. Instead, we have to go into something called global configuration mode. Notice the prompt just changed again, and now we can make changes to the switch that will have a global impact. One of the globally impactful changes will be to give this switch a new host name. Yep, and we do that with the host name command in global configuration mode. Note, configure terminal to get in global configuration mode, and then we can go ahead and name the switch appropriately. Anyone in the live audience got a name for me? I'm just not feeling very creative today. Anybody got a name for my switch? We'll take the first one in. As long as it's clean, this is a family show. All right, Steve says SGFS. You got it. So now we have a switch named SGFS. Now, this is a layer 2 switch. Okay? By the way, what's funny is, in all reality, this is a layer 3 switch that we're on, but I have not turned on its routing capabilities, okay? We are not going to use this particular device as a router, okay? We've decided not to, and we're talking about layer 2 switches, so that's a good decision. Let me prove that to you. I'm going to type end, and then I'm going to do this. Show IP route. And it does not show me a routing table. It shows me an ICMP redirect cache. This means that this is not a switch right now that's set up to route. Good. Good. So it is a layer 2 switch. That's what I want. Now, I'm going to teach you how we can assign an IP address to this particular device. But wait a minute. Before I teach you how to assign an IP address to this device, let's ask a very important question here. Why would you even want an IP address, a layer 3 IP address, on a layer 2 switch? This isn't making any sense. We have a layer 2 only thing. Why are we putting an IP address on it? And everybody is already answering me in the audience. Great job. You are such a sharp bunch. It's so we can manage it remotely. It's so we can secure shell or telnet into this device in order to manage this device from somewhere far away. Now, how you put a management IP address on the device is you go in and you go into what's called interface VLAN 1. This is a default VLAN that is participating on all of your ports. So this is a great place initially to put an IP address for management. So we say interface VLAN virtual local area network 1. We'll talk more about VLANs later, don't worry. Interface VLAN 1, IP address, and then whatever IP address that we are going to assign to this device. And notice you follow that up with a subnet mask. Don't worry, we'll talk more about subnet masks and IP addresses later on, okay? But notice for right now, just stay with me. We are just giving this thing its IP address for management purposes. Now, wait a minute. If we come in from some far away place, we are never going to be able to communicate back to that faraway place unless we have a router to help us. So one of the other configurations I want you to master today is the configuration of a default gateway, a local router that can have this switch get its traffic off of the local segment, and this default gateway configuration is done in global configuration mode. So we're going to exit from interface configuration mode, and I'm going to say IP default gateway, and I'm going to give the default gateway address. Let's pretend we have a local router at 10.5.5.100. And now we can use that local router to route traffic out of our local segment. Well, my goodness, we've done a lot of great configurations to the SGFS device, and I think we better save all of that configuration. So let's go in and save this config with copy running-config to startup-config. Copying the configuration from RAM to non-volatile RAM on the device. So we go in and we say copy running config to startup config. Copy running config to startup config. And now we can reload this device and this configuration will still be available for us. Pretty awesome. Now, let's do some confirmations here. We saved the configuration to the startup config. Let's see if it worked. Show startup config. Aha, it worked. The startup config has our hostname assignment. The startup config has our VLAN interface IP address. The startup config has our default gateway assignment. Pretty awesome. So show run or show startup config allows you to see those things. What about verifying what type of device I'm on? Show version. Show version tells you what you're on. A 3560 type device. Here's the operating system it's running, what version of the operating system that is. It is specifically a 3560 type device. Great stuff, great information. It tells us how long this device has been powered up, and that's 14 minutes. There has been some fantastic examples of Cisco device show version output where we see switches that have been available for literally years and years and years without rebooting. Steve asks, when you're setting the IP address, by the way, do you have to type it out longhand like that? Yes, you do, Steve. On this Cisco device, you can't use a shortcut. And remember, when you're practicing something like that, try it. Won't hurt, right? Interface FA 0/0. There isn't one. Interface Fast Ethernet 0/1. IP address. Let me go to interface VLAN 1 where we can assign an IP address. IP address 10.5.5.11, and Steve wants to do /24. And it says, no, sorry, can't do it. So don't be afraid. Absolutely experiment in your lab as you are working with these commands. Okay? Absolutely great idea for you to experiment. It's just lab equipment. You can't hurt anything. All right. So show startup, show running. How about this one? Show interfaces. Wow. This command is going to give you great details about the health and statistics of your interfaces. I would never run it that way. You'd be there forever. What we tend to do is we do show interface and then give the name of the one you want to look at. Maybe it's Fast Ethernet 0/10. Now notice the output only shows you the information for Fast Ethernet 0/10. You could do show interface Fast Ethernet 0/14 next if you wanted to look at that information for interface 14. So, awesome stuff. By the way, does this switch have a MAC address table? I hope it does. That's what a layer 2 switch is supposed to do. And if you just want to see the dynamic entries that have been learned in that MAC address table, do show MAC address table dynamic, and look at this. The switch is doing, thank goodness, what we hired it to do in our network. It is dynamically learning the MAC addresses of the network devices that live off of those ports.